it's just, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And so some of you are familiar with that from James 1:5. And that kind of illustrates the principle of, in our lives, whenever we are in an educational setting, always inviting the spiritual side of that to help us learn always benefits us and gets us more along that educational path. So if we want to turn over here, as we discuss Joseph Smith and his initial experience with the cycle, we can see how he continued that process throughout his life. So Joseph Smith, as we discussed, he wasn't necessarily educated in the same ways that we are, or formally at all, but he learned a ton through the scriptures. And so he would read the scriptures and became so fluent in them that he could kind of interweave the quotes from the scriptures into his everyday language. And he really became a devoted student of God in that sense. He also prized other educational topics, and he knew that secular education was extremely important. One, to be able to talk with other Christians and understand other people, but just to gain our education and our knowledge in general was something godly. And so throughout his life, he applied that. And one example is in the School of the Prophets. As he established that and the Lord helped him in that process, we can clearly see how the study experience revelation cycle was applied, and all the saints were able to gain a temporal and a spiritual education in that setting. One interesting fact about the School of the Prophets is just that it was open for just a few months. I think 4 months is when it was really running in full. But just from that, we can take the basis for the rest of the church education system. That served as the foundation of how the church education system would run after that. And it was kind of the start of the saints prioritizing education in their lives. Just move to this corner, and just as a continuation to kind of give the history from the School of the Prophets led, even though it was only open for a few months, that wasn't the end of their education. It led to School of the Elders, as well as the Kirtland School, are two more examples of when saints gathered together early on to study topics ranging from secular topics as well as spiritual topics. For example, one story is that the saints wanted to learn Hebrew so that they could communicate better with fellow Christians and be better missionaries, and ultimately read the Bible better in the Hebrew language. And so they brought in a Hebrew teacher who taught them how to read Hebrew, and they studied languages that way. Even though it might not be the easiest thing to do, the most obvious way to learn, they really stretched themselves to get that education. What you'll see here is like the bottom fifth of this large painting, so you may not be able to see the whole thing, but if you've ever been in the gallery, you know that there are two large paintings on either side, and we'll show you the other one when we go to the other side. But in the center of this painting, I'll just lift the camera a little bit, is the Kirtland Temple. And it's that little white dot off to the right. And the rest of the painting is mainly sky and clouds. And so really the focus of the painting is the Kirtland Temple. And the title of this painting I love, which is called The Temple, a Holy School. I think, oh yeah, here's, Heather just brought me a postcard of it so you can see it better. That's a better way. So you can see that the temple's right there in the middle, definitely the focal point, and then the rest of it, you have that sky. This is the scene of Kirtland. If anyone's been to Kirtland, you'll recognize this. I have not, and so it's very easy to, when you come in and look at it, you kind of think, wait, what temple is that? But it is the Kirtland Temple, so if you've been there, you probably instantly recognized it. But I love the title of it. As I was saying, the Temple, a Holy School, kind of talks, helps us understand that the temple is a place that we learn in more ways than one. And especially here at the Kirtland Temple, saints didn't just learn spiritual things in the temple. It was also used as a community center, as a school. And people in the community came to learn temporal topics as well, arithmetic and other things like that. Got a couple comments here. I'm just going to open it to see if there are any questions so far. So we've got eternity and time. Great. So we have one question. On the School of the Prophets props, coat, books, and chair, is there a story behind them or are they reproductions? And I will leave that to Heather to answer for you.
Well, okay, you all are IP&T students, so you understand the importance of visual representation. The Kirtland era happened before photography. Daguerreotype photography comes in the 1840s, and that's primarily centered more in France and in Europe. It does make its way to the US pretty quickly, but it's not widespread. So these are props, because we don't have good photography from that era to help explain what is going on. And then this painting over here, if you can see it, this also was commissioned for the gallery. And this is a painting of the School of the Elders from Missouri. Again, it's just how do we convey this information visually, which I'm sure you all can understand because that's what you're learning to do.
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. There are several other props that we may see throughout the gallery, and most of them are representations. There is one. Is the desk a representation as well?
Part of the desk is original.
Okay.
And then the other part was lost. And so what they did is they were able to buy a piece from a different desk that fit this desk.
Awesome. So keep that in mind when we get there. You'll see what we're talking about. But thank you guys for the questions and comments so far. It's great to hear the interaction. And just to kind of conclude with this section, Boyd K. Packer has the quote. He said, "The temple is a great school. It is a house of learning." And I think that's the basis of the title of this painting. The temple is a place where we can learn spiritually. The saints used it as a place where they could learn temporarily early on. And that passion for education is something that has continued all the way down the timeline until today. So it's not unique to, or it's not new to BYU, but it is rather unique to BYU. All right, we should.
Okay, hang on, we're gonna move into another room and take drawing.
Yeah, we'll probably actually.
You're gonna go this way.
Yeah. Layout.
Yeah.
Great. So we kind of skipped a little bit of the gallery. If you were here, you could wander through, and it continues talking about the timeline of the church education system and how we got here today, talking about seminaries and institutes and academies and church schools. And so as we get into this final section of this side of the gallery, which is talking about the study experience revelation cycle, these are examples of how the study experience revelation cycle continues to bless church members in the 21st century. And so how do we use it today? And not just us as everyday people, but even leaders of the church use this cycle. And so here are 3 examples of ways that the study experience revelation cycle has been applied that have impacted each of us in some way. So small temples in 1997 is one revelation that has impacted many of our lives. I'm from Arkansas, and the closest temple before was Oklahoma City, which is 4 hours away. And a temple was just announced in Bentonville. I don't know if it's the small temple, but without the temple that was 4 hours away, then we would have had to travel, who knows how far, I think 6 or 7 hours, which, even in the States is kind of surprising. And so the small temple that was 4 hours away really made a difference in my life. And maybe many of you can relate. Another example is the missionary age change. And this was in 2012. Many of our siblings, or maybe even one of you, was impacted by this age change. And then the ministering announcement most recently is something that is a great example of this, because ministering assignments follow the study experience revelation cycle as ministering brothers and sisters try to meet the needs of those they serve. And so it came through a revelation, but we apply it as well through studying the scriptures, coming up with experiences, acting on those, and then receiving revelation. There are a couple questions that we've gotten so far, so I'm going to pause really quickly and address those and see if we can answer them. Okay, we have, thank you for your willingness to roll the camera around. Thank you, Heather. This is my favorite part of the gallery. Is it revolution or revelation? Revelation. Sorry, I might not be pronouncing that very well. I'm talking with a mask. I get used to saying things differently. It's already hard to understand, so might as well make it harder. No, but
You're from
yes,
Arkansas.
I'm from Arkansas. That's my excuse. Yeah, Revelation. Thank you. I didn't realize it's been so long since the missionary age was changed. That is true. It does seem like it was very recent. But if we wanted to continue this wall, we could probably keep going down the gallery, take out some walls, and we would have a ton of new revelations. So as we get to this wall, this room is called the reflection room. And I think this is probably applicable to you guys as IP&T students, giving, and throughout our tours is something we try to incorporate, is giving a time to ponder and reflect and experience that on their own for students. And so these are several questions that students can come and write their answers on the boards. And I want to pause and take some time to reflect on 2 questions today. So I think we were thinking of this question is one. It says, how has the study experience revelation cycle helped me learn? And so I'm just going to throw it out to you guys. Is there an example that you would like to share of how the study experience revelation cycle has helped you in your personal learning?
I'll share. I think that study and pondering, reflecting, and then experiencing here on earth in the physical realm, and then pairing it with revelation and guidance from the Spirit and from heaven gives me confidence as a learner. I feel that I learn more than I could if I just studied or experienced, but or if I just received revelation, that there has to be that practice and that reflection, which goes to Downs' theory of learning as well. So I like that connection to what we've been learning in some of our other courses, but it gives me confidence.
That's a great insight. I haven't heard that one before. The idea of confidence. I think that's a really, you get 2 confirmations of what you're learning is true. And I think that's a great way. If anyone has another comment, feel free to speak up really quickly. I'll just read some of these from the chat. The cycle led me to the program. Me as well, great. And a continual overlap of temporal and spiritual learning. So it seems like you guys have definitely felt this, especially the revelation side, probably leading you to the program and the cycle continuing. Are there any other comments about that? Okay, we're gonna look at one more question on this side. Thank you, Heather. And that is, how can revelation lead to wisdom? So if anyone has any thoughts about how can revelation lead to wisdom, feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up.
I think, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So I think there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom, and the scriptures refer to it as understanding. We can know that the sun's going to come up. We can know that water boils at a certain temperature. But any time that the Spirit confirms knowledge, it becomes understanding or wisdom. And so I think the combination of going through the process of learning new things, but then having the Spirit confirm that can lead to deeper understanding.
Thank you. I love that. That is exactly what kind of this question is framed around, is helping us understand that there are 2 levels to education and to knowledge. There's basic knowledge, like you said, and then there's wisdom, which is a much higher level. Other comments about that?
I have a comment. I've done a lot of work in the community and stuff around helping people in need, and so there's a lot of stuff that has happened, I guess, or that the Lord has revealed to me that I never would have thought of, that has always been right. The revelation has helped me receive, that wisdom from the Lord and doing it His way. which has always been the best way, and it's always worked out well, and it's always served well for the people that I'm serving. And so I guess revelation, or his wisdom, and applying that to my work and how I serve others has really made a difference, especially in the communities that I serve.
Thank you. That's a really good insight as well. I love what you said about, you didn't know what was really the right choice, but the revelation led you to find the right choice in the end. I think that's a great example of wisdom. It's higher knowledge than we have. It's from God. I'll read just a couple of these comments really quick before we move to the other side. So we have, revelation often teaches us how to apply the knowledge that we have gained. Revelation is preliminary. The point of education is to move from know/learn to become. Wisdom is what happens when we embody revelation. And getting ideas from the wisest person means he'd be speaking wisdom. That's true. And then talking about how it's a cycle and an application of knowledge. These are all really good. You guys are, wow, getting it. So that's great. Thank you for your comments on that. We'll move to the other side of the gallery now. Great. So hopefully you guys aren't too dizzy after that. We tried to make it pretty stable with the rolling tripod, but that distance probably shook some up. So just to kind of recap what I mentioned at the beginning, that was the study experience revelation cycle. This side is talking about specifically the 4 aims of a BYU education, which is represented by a square. And so how do we, what are the 4 aims? How do we apply them? And what do they mean for us uniquely as students at BYU? And so to kind of kick that off, as we looked at the history of the church education system, church academies were a part of how the saints kind of organized education. And you're probably familiar with the name Carl G. Mazer, the Mazer building. You've probably seen it around if you're a BYU student. And so his story is very interesting and unique and provides a really interesting insight into how special this university is. And so he was the second principal of Brigham Young Academy at the time, but is kind of attributed to being the founder, the one who really got it off the ground, because he was given the charge from Brigham Young to, I'm going to read it so I don't misquote it. Brigham Young gave him the charge to not attempt to teach even the alphabet or the multiplication table without the Spirit of God. And so Mazer was a convert. He was from a foreign country. He was German. And so he was a teacher. He had been familiar with teaching, but being new to the church and being new to the States was a huge challenge to get a charge from this prophet to teach everything with the Spirit of God and do a great job. And so you can imagine the pressure that built up and how much he probably had to think about this and apply the study experience revelation cycle. And so as he sat at his desk and thought about it day after day, he would kind of pace his office and scribble notes. And he probably had prayed before, but one day he fell on his knees and he was disheartened and prayed to God and said, "Oh, Father, show me the way. Help me to make the plans for this great work. I cannot do it of myself." And immediately the confusion of all that time before had been erased. He was able to kind of immediately place the blueprints for the future school that would become Brigham Young University, but was at the time Brigham Young Academy. And so that plan, that inspired plan that Mazer wrote, launched and shaped the worldwide educational program that we have now. So kind of a really, really cool story actually that we often don't hear. Just Mazer's whole life was really unique and interesting and inspired. And so that leads us to, this is the desk we were talking about over here. And so this is kind of a model. Part of it is the real desk and part of it is a replica, but of the desk that he was given as a gift from the Utah Territorial School Association to recognize his service. so how did Mazer do this, and what did he form it around? And so the Four Aims is something that was not necessarily formally a part of BYU from the start, but the elements of it were always there in the education, in the kind of infrastructure. And so Mazer was classically educated. He had knowledge of the virtues and things like that the Four Aims are really based upon. And so he would often refer to these things and talk of a well-rounded education that would educate the whole soul. But the Four Aims came into play a little later in the timeline and are really solidified today. We hear a lot about them. And so again, that quote, "You must not attempt to teach the alphabet or the multiplication table without the Spirit of God." We can see how that is very much applicable today in our education. We have the Spirit present through the Four Aims. And so I'm just curious, before we talk about the Four Aims, does anyone want to recite the Four Aims? Heather said them at the beginning, but can anyone remind us of what they are briefly? If anyone remembers, that's okay if not.
Spiritually strengthening, intellectually enlarging. I don't remember the other two.
Leading to lifelong service and learning.
Perfect.
Character building.
Character building.
Great, there we go. Teamwork, right? More brains is always better than one. So you guys got it. So I like to do that because, well, I guess it was kind of indoctrinated into us at NSO when I first started, and ever since then it is hard to remember each of them, but I think the principles are easy to recognize. And I think even though they're not individually unique or necessarily special, all of them together form a really special combination. And so thank you guys. As you said, spiritually strengthening, intellectually enlarging, character building, and leading to lifelong learning and service are what the university is based upon. And there are a couple quotes here on the wall. I won't read all of them, but they each apply to one of the quotes. And so I'll just read really quickly the intellectually enlarging quote. It says, "Learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor and attended to with diligence." And so it talks about how education is a very intentional thing. And I love that concept. One thing that Mazer also talked about is on the opposite wall, and it just is a quote that says, "God speaks to us in every drop of water, every blade of grass," and he continues kind of listing things, ways that God talks to us in just everyday life. And I think that's another great way to frame our time at BYU. We can gain a lot of education through experiences outside of just studying. And then we'll touch on this picture up here that you can't see, but Heather graciously brought the postcard of. And so this is the same size as the one on the opposite side of the gallery. But what I love about this title of the painting is "The School, a Temple of Learning." And so we had the temple, a holy school on the other side. This one is the school, a temple of learning. And the focus of this painting, as you can see, is, if any of you are familiar with Provo, that is what is now the Provo Library. And you see that when you drive down University, but it was Brigham Young Academy originally. And then in the background, it kind of hints toward the founding of Brigham Young University with the Mazer building there. And so how that transitioned into something even bigger. Thanks, Heather. And so there are lots of cool stories about people who had dreams about the foundation of Brigham Young University. Carl G. Mazer himself had a dream, seeing students kind of walking around campus and something bigger than what had been formed. Brigham Young Academy had a lot of trials and challenges getting off the ground, but through those, they were able to be even more committed to making this education happen. And so really BYU is a miracle in all of those senses, and it's awesome to see that. So this brings us to the reflection room on this side of the gallery. Talking about the four aims, I realize you can see the circle and square with these a little better with the whiteboards here. So there are a couple questions here I want to frame back to you guys. How has my spiritual learning enhanced my secular learning? So what are your guys' thoughts about that? How has your spiritual learning enhanced your secular learning?
So in psychology, I taught intro to psych, and we had a section on intelligence, and I was able to bring up the talk in section 93 about the glory of God as intelligence, in other words, light and truth. And we were able to discuss as a class, well, how does God see intelligence, and does this inform the way that the world sees intelligence? Is there an overlap here? Is there something from God's wisdom that can inform the way we talk about intelligence, and does that infect your learning here at BYU? Is really fruitful discussion. The students had really good things to say, and it was really awesome to bring up some actual doctrine from the scriptures that could actually apply to what we were talking about.
That's really interesting. That's a great point. Thanks for sharing. Any other comments about that? How spiritual learning enhances secular learning?
I think that sometimes it's not about enhancement. It is my spiritual learning, is my secular learning, because I can identify a lot of times when I just can't get a concept, or I'm really struggling with something, and I turn to the scriptures, and that's what opens it up. So I think sometimes it's that word enhance isn't necessarily part of it. It's that my spiritual learning is what gives me the secular learning, and that I'm able to see things more clearly through the Spirit in a way that no matter how much I worked or how much secular learning I did would be possible. You know, it really is, the Spirit can bring clarity in ways that secularism can't.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought as well. Through spiritual learning, we often learn secular things, and I think that's a great point, is that they play into each other, often are so intertwined that they really do support each other in that way. Thank you guys. Let's look at one more question, and I think I'll just leave this for you guys to think about, unless anyone has a comment about it. But it is, how do I think these four aims work together? And so are there any quick thoughts on how do you think the four aims work together?
I think they really build on each other, right? Because you can't have lifelong learning and service unless you've built character, unless you've done the other things. So for me, it's kind of a continuum in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an incredible combination that they each play into each other, and one leads to another. You know, as you build your character, you serve more people. That comes from a good education and things like that. And so I'll end here on this wall, which is the original painting by Jorge Coco Santangelo, which is 40 Nights. And if you guys have ever been to the Kennedy Center, you may have seen the other painting, which is 40 Days, also his original painting. So we're lucky to have the original here of 40 Nights, and it's here in this room for, I think, a really great reason to kind of finish the whole gallery tour off, to reflect upon Christ and how he's an example of all of this. It's kind of, the light kind of reflects a little bit, so sorry if you can't see it super well, but look it up after, and you can kind of dive into that. But I think it's really interesting to think of Christ and how he was alone in this circumstance. He was in need of help and prayed and received guidance and revelation in his preparation for something bigger and something very real, similar to the situation that we are in as students. We are preparing for something, and we rely on God. Are there any other thoughts about the painting and maybe why that relates to other students? Let me check the comments really quick. Okay, you guys answered a lot of the questions from before, and that's great. These are awesome. Very well thought out. That's okay. So with this, I just invite you to think about and ponder, how am I like Christ in this setting right now in my education? And how can I mimic, or how can he be an example to me throughout my education? And so that's the tour. I hope you guys enjoyed that and kind of saw the themes that we were talking about. I'll let Heather take over now to kind of conclude.
Well, thank you all for your attention. I know this is hard because we're all getting screen fatigue these days. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to talk about before we wrap up today? Let's see if we can get comments up. Thanks, Nick. Loved this tour. That was great. Thanks. The gallery is open as long as classes are still being held before everything goes online at the end of November or perhaps earlier. We're still open, so please come in. Let's see the other comments. Okay. Thank you. Well, wonderful. We're so glad to have you here. And, you know, from an IP&T perspective, I feel like our content is solid. We're always working on delivery. So if you have any suggestions, please come talk to me or shoot me an email. Thanks.
We are so grateful for our friends at Education in Zion. Let's thank them so much for their time today. I am going to break us into a breakout groups of small groups for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. What I want you to talk about is what do the things we've learned today imply for you in your coursework or project work this semester? So we'll just do that for about 5 minutes or so. Come back here, maybe get a couple of thoughts. Education Design, you're free to log out now. So we're just going to do the breakout rooms. Again, thank you so much for your efforts. Let me get the breakout rooms organized here. We are going to do this, let's say, for about 5 minutes. So you'll get a notification when there's a minute left. And let's do rooms for 3 or 4 participants each. So you should be getting a notification that the rooms are open. Go ahead and join. Sarah, Joseph, are the breakout rooms not working for you? Welcome back. Let's just start hearing from some of the groups as people are coming back. Just share maybe one thing that you talked about in your group, one piece of wisdom that other students will learn from.
So one thing I shared, oh, sorry, I think I cut someone off. One thing I shared that I thought was interesting is, so I'm taking advanced instructional design right now. And we're spending the first little bit in the semester reviewing like 5 of the major schools of thought when it comes to like education and also just like psychology in general, but specifically like behaviorism, cognitivism, connectivism, social, and humanism. And so, and we're just like constantly talking about how what learning looks like through those 5 different schools of thought. And so this exhibit was interesting because to me, it just made it seem like, you know, a 6th school of thought that you could think of would be like the spiritual and revelation side of how learning works.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Emily, were you going to say something as well?
Yeah, I was just going to share from my group. We talked about, Theresa talked about how, you know, she felt like she had a purpose in coming here, and that the Spirit can really guide us through our learning in a program to a very specific mission, to a specific area of service, area of focus. And if we let it, and if we are open and in tune with the Spirit, then we will really be guided to important service, I think.
Wonderful. One more insight. Anyone else?
I think in our group, one of the things that stood out is sometimes it's the very small things, like Jessie was talking about how sometimes she's studying a topic and she decides to read one book or one article over another. And so sometimes I think it's as simple as that revelation comes in those small moments of, oh, I'm going to choose this over that. And sometimes that's harder to recognize in the kind of overarching scheme of things.
Thank you. Good insights shared, and I'm sure there were good insights in your groups. We're going to conclude seminar now. Just a couple of things to wrap up. Remember to do the quiz in Canvas, get your recognition for participating today. We are looking forward to you joining us again next week, next Wednesday at noon. The recordings for these, they'll be posted to the department YouTube channel a couple of days after seminar is completed. Rachel, I saw she sent out an announcement last week. I'm assuming she will continue to do that, as well as just we can put in Canvas maybe just the YouTube channel itself that you can find. We'll go ahead and stop this recording.